I want to thank my colleague, Sean Sander, who is our host. And I think it's just about 8 o'clock. So I'm going to start by asking Sean to screen share the first page just to give a little bit of an overview of our 1 hour conversation. So Sean, if you can show that intro. So here's our plan for tonight. I want to just get some general comments from people, pro and con, about the book. I mean, it elicited the strongest possible emotion in me. I am just an advocate for this book, but I know that other people have very different views, and I welcome all those views. And I'd love to hear just a sampling of views, people who really liked the book, people who really did not like the book, and just kind of set the framework for general response. Then I'm going to look at as you know, there's 12 chapters to the book. I think the book is so rich that each chapter could deserve its own session, but I just picked 4 different pieces. The first, and what I tried to do, these are pieces that I felt could be broadly applicable to the biggest number of people. So the first one I want to talk about, I think, is applicable to everybody. We're the people of the book. I wanted to talk about her insight, which I found stunning, 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 and I had never thought about it, that Christian literature is happy, happy, and uplifting. Somebody is getting an insight, somebody's getting an epiphany, somebody's getting saved at the end. There's a redeeming at the end. And how she points out that Jewish literature, especially in Hebrew and especially in Yiddish, does not do happy. That's the characteristic of Yiddish and Hebrew literature. We don't do happy. Christian literature does happy. Jewish literature does not do happy. I found that a stunning insight, and I wanted to dwell on that. Then next in line, if you can think pre-pandemic, back when we used to get on planes more easily, many of us, I know Shira and I have done this, have gone to Europe, into places where Jews used to live that no longer live there. And they're often referred to as Jewish heritage sites. And she, of course, does this with the second chapter, Harbin. And she notes that Jewish heritage sites are heritage sites instead of cities where Jews actually live, because the residents of those cities killed the Jews, massacred the Jews, pogromized the Jews, destroyed the Jews. And now they want American Jews and Israeli Jews to spend their money in those sites, and want to talk about the problematic of Jewish heritage sites. And in each case, Sean is going to be kind enough to just show a quick excerpt so that we're all reading from the same page of the hymnal. Third idea that we're going to talk about, and this is just so interesting, when I talked to my colleague, Eliza Berger, she is chairing from the rabbi end a Herculean effort from the lay end. There's 200 people who are super jazzed at the temple, not with Shachris Mincha or Maariv, or not with Shabbos. They're super jazzed with the gate of helping Afghan refugees, and they're giving real time to Afghan refugees. And they're finding helping Afghan refugees is just deeply, deeply meaningful. And I found this whole chapter, I think it's the longest chapter in the book, about Varian Fry and the asymmetry, and to me, unexpected thing that he saves 2,000 people, and the ingratitude of the rescue, that he can't get the people he saved to return his calls. And I found that whole chapter really interesting, and just on its own. And then I think it raises really interesting issues about rescue work that we do today, helping Syrian refugees a few years ago, helping Afghan refugees today. I want to talk about that. And then finally, I want to talk about the end of the book, and we can talk a little more about the climax of the book.
I got it here.
The chapters 11 and 12, but the end, she reports how her heart is broken and she just gives up when there's more violence against Jews in the New York, New Jersey area, and the reporting on it basically exonerates the people who killed Jews and basically justifies the murder of Jews in the New York Times and justifies the murder of Jews in the Washington Post. And it's okay, it's just Jews. Jews are squeezing blacks, etc. And it breaks her heart and it makes her give up. And then she finds redemption in Daf Yomi, the study of Talmud every day. And I want to talk about that as a response to what she describes in the book, the anti-Semitism, or as she puts it, people love dead Jews. Is Jewish learning a good response? And then we'll end with, particularly if you like the book, if you found the book really important, what do you do next? Where do we go from here? So that is the outline. So Sean, now you can take that screen off and then we can see people. And I want to begin by just, I think we have a lot of material to cover. I'd like to just get 1 or 2 comments of people who really loved the book, and then 1 or 2 comments of people who really did not love the book, just to kind of set the stage. And because we're blessed to have 4 screens, I'm going to ask people to put their request to speak in the chat room, and then I'll just call on you. So if you want to talk about why you love the book, we'll start with that first. Put your name in the chat room and I will call on you. And then after that, if you want to talk about why you really did not care for this book, put your name in the chat room and I'll call on you. And then we'll get into the content as I set forth in the outline. So anyone who wishes to share about their general reactions to the book, would love to hear some general reactions. Anyone?
I can't seem to open the chat.
Oh, okay.
Oh, there it goes. There it goes.
Okay. Eric, do I take it that you would like to say something?
Yeah, I'd like to say something
Okay,
positive.
Eric, I would love to hear your voice.
Thank you. I love the book. I thought it gave me a new way of looking at, Jewish heritage sites, the Holocaust Memorial in Boston. I actually just stumbled upon it the other day. Again, I was down there and I looked at it a different way. I looked at it like, what's the point of this place? Was the point of this to end or to make a difference in the way that people feel about Jews? Same thing with the Washington D.C. Holocaust Museum. Was the point to teach people about how bad things were and to make them look at Jews differently and to notice that no, people love dead Jews. They're comfortable with them, but they're not comfortable with us here. And what can we do about it? So it's an inquiry. It gave me a different way of looking at things, and I just love that it opened my mind that way.
Well, Eric, thank you. I really appreciate those comments. And I'm just, by a quick show of hands, just so I could see how many of you, back in the days before the pandemic, when people would travel, would go to Italy, and you would go to Venice, and you would go to the ghetto, and you would see, and you would think, or you would go to Spain, and you would see this where Nachmanides was forced into disputation, or you would go into any city in Europe where this is where Jews were rounded up from, and there's no Jews there. How many of you used to do that or have done that before? Taken a tour of Jewish Europe, which is now reduced to a museum piece, right? And so he speaks to that, and we'll get to that. So I think Alice Langton has a comment. Alice, you're our next speaker.
I am nowhere near as knowledgeable or articulate as Dara Horn, and I think she's fabulous and so well educated. But I have always had that feeling myself, that dead Jews are always popular, that people just felled from all the little things they've seen in little memorials all over Berlin and different cities that say, Mr. and Mrs. Cohen used to live here and the Nazis killed them. And, that people feel very proud that they're saying the Nazis killed them. They like it that nobody's mincing words. But I am very struck that makes people feel better because they don't have to deal with Jews. These Jews that are dead don't bother them. And so I have been aware of that phenomenon. I think that people put up memorials in like our Holocaust memorial in Boston, because I think they in fact do want to honor those who died so terribly. And I think that's fine, but I think she's right about what the purpose is, what the result is for non-Jews.
Thank you, Alice. So far, there's kind of a confluence of thinking today that this book raises important questions. It points to a fact that intersects with our lives, which is we go to Europe and we see cities where our forebears, fellow Jews, just like us, used to live until they were slaughtered or persecuted or expelled. And that's throughout Europe. And yet now those are, now we don't have living Jews, we have a plaque and we're supposed to look at that. And I think she does make us think about that. And so Alice and Eric were sharing a positive reaction to that. I want to just, in the spirit of Talmudic debate and Hillel and Shammai, I know that 2 Jews, 3 opinions. So I would love to invite different opinions. Did anyone have a problem with this book? Did anyone have a negative reaction to this book? Did anyone think that what she said was unfair or untrue or unkind or not accurate, or that she had her own agenda and that she doesn't really do justice to something? I would love to hear a counter voice. And if anyone wants to share that, please put your desire in a chat. Okay, Merle Haas, or is that Sylvain? Sylvain has a Sylvain and Merle. If one of you wants to speak, we'd love to hear you.
Yeah, well, I just want to comment on what Alice just said. And of course, I come from a different perspective. I grew up in Europe, so I've been to all those places because I lived there. And what I love the book, my comment on what was said is more my experience with my father, who survived the Holocaust and was in several camps. In '92, we actually went back to all the camps he went to during the war. And the most difficult part of the trip is when we went somewhere and there was no plaque. So for him as a survivor, it was very important to actually have something that marked what happened.
Mm.
So you have to also say that perspective. The other comment that goes directly to what Eric said about the Holocaust memorial here in Boston is what my father came to visit the first time. He was so impressed that the memorial was downtown next to the Freedom Trail where everybody would see it, and insisted he wanted me to send him picture to show, because the one in Brussels is kind of lost in a place where nobody goes. And the big trend today in Belgium is to put memory cobblestones. They put essentially a cobblestone in front of the house where people were deported and died. So the question is, are we doing it for respect for the people who perished, which I think is very important, or for, informing the others? And I think that educating others, educating non-Jews, is sort of a lost cause. But recognizing that the people that perish value, the fact that we recognize that they died, is also an important fact that should not be forgotten.
Thank you, Sylvain. Okay, given the energy of the conversation, I'm going to go out of the order of my outline. I want to go straight then to the problematics of the Jewish Heritage Site. Sean, if you could please screen share page 5 of the handout. I want to read this real quick, just a little piece of it. This is in the chapter on Harbin. Thank you, Sean. Page 5 of the handout. And if you can just move it up a little bit. A little bit more, please. For now, okay. There is a tourist industry concept popular in places largely devoid of Jews called Jewish heritage sites. The term is a truly ingenious piece of marketing. Jewish heritage is a phrase that sounds utterly benign, or to Jews, perhaps even so slightly dutiful, suggesting a place that you surely ought to visit. After all, you came all this way, so how could you not? It is a much better name than property seized from dead or expelled Jews. By calling these places Jewish heritage sites, all those pesky moral concerns about, say, why these sites exist to begin with, evaporate in a mist of goodwill. And not just goodwill, but goodwill aimed directly at you, the Jewish tourist. These non-Jewish citizens and their benevolent government have chosen to maintain this cemetery or renovate this synagogue or create this museum purely out of their profound respect for the Jews who once lived here and who, for unstated reasons, no longer do, and out of their sincere hope that you, the Jewish tourist, might someday arrive. But still, you cannot help but feel uncomfortable. So Thank you, Sean. You can go back to the full screen. I'd love some thoughts on how does that invite you to rethink on a day when we can travel again freely. Would you go see the Venice ghetto, where Jews used to be treated like cattle? Would you go to the Venice ghetto? Would you go to these places where they show you this is where the Jews were rounded up for slaughter by the Nazis? I mean, I've been to so many of those tours. Or would you say, you know what? I'm going to Israel. I don't need to go to where there used to be Jews before they murdered them. I'm going to go to Jerusalem and Israel today. So, Stacy Grossman, would you like to share your thinking on that? When you say it's problematic, what's problematic? Her critique or what they do?
I think it's problematic in that we, on the one hand, want to go to physical spaces that hold the memory of our ancestors, and honor their memory in that way, like a pilgrimage. But it's problematic because we are pouring money into an economy that destroyed our ancestors and that are profiting off of that murder. My late husband and I went to a place in Hungary where his father's family was from, called Chateau Royal in Hungary. And the Satmar population provides an enormous amount of money to Christian Hungarians there to maintain the cemetery, which was desecrated. And what's left of the cemetery is broken gravestones and scratched out names. And they go to that site annually as a pilgrimage because the Rebbe, a famous Satmar Rebbe is buried there. And I think I told you this morning, Wes, but there was one Holocaust survivor, a female, who decided to go back to Chateau Royal. They had one Jew in the city of Chateau Royal when we went there. And several years later, my husband and I found out that she had been murdered. So it's extremely complicated and problematic for, I think, some of those reasons. Thank you, Stacy. I will just say, and this is a longer conversation, we could have a 4-session class on this. I'm, for example, in a very different space than Michelle and Elias on this with regard to, and I understand where they're coming from. They're big, strong proponents of March of the Living to go to Auschwitz, and I understand that. And I know we did a project like that a few years ago, and it was deeply meaningful, and I get it. But I just to what you say, Stacy, if I am going to go anywhere, 100 times out of 100 times, I want to go to Eretz Israel. I want to go to a Jewish state where Jews thrive. I do not want to go to a place where they kill Jews. And I especially do not want to go to a place where they kill Jews and I have to give them my credit card wherever I go to a hotel and restaurants and they're making money off dead Jews. So what I would say to those places is not printable in a rabbinic context on a synagogue Zoom, but it's 2 words and the second one is you. That's my take to all those European places. I'm going to Israel. So I just really resonated with this. Paula Apsel and then Shirley Saunders. Paula, please.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi. My view is, I understand why there have to be memorials to the Jews who were murdered by the Germans and by all their European collaborators. And I don't object to that. What I object to is that they don't celebrate the real story. Ever since biblical days, since the Maccabees, and throughout Jewish history, Jews have fought back, but those stories, for some reason, are never told. We don't even tell them, which is amazing. And that is also the story of the Holocaust, the way Jews with arms, and even those who could not obtain arms, fought back in many different ways. And people love dead Jews because they're passive. You don't have to be afraid of them. But the kind of Jews that are in Eretz Israel, the Jews that fight back, the Jews that defend their lives and defend the Jewish spirit, those Jews are afraid of. And so that is not part
Mm.
of the story. And I wish it were.
Thank you, Paul. We're gonna have one last comment on this, and then we're gonna move on to her, to me, stunning point about Jewish literature. Shirley Sanders, you wanted to speak about something. Shirley? Okay, we're gonna move on. Sean, if you can please screen share page 2, and then I'm gonna have you screen share page 3 and 4. Page 2, please. This is about the point of Jewish literature. So she quotes Denise. Dear Ms. Horn, I recently began reading your book, The World to Come, about a pogrom survivor. After the scene of the horse being beaten, I threw the book across the room with all the cruelty in the world. I find it more of a service to mankind to write a book for people to laugh, enjoy, and be uplifted. Best wishes, Denise. And then go, if you would, Sean, to pages 3, to start with page 3. So on page 3, that's good, that's good, that's good. And go down on page 3, go down a little more so I can see more of page 3. Now, Sean, if you can go down lower on page 3, please. Thank you. So she quotes this American literary critic, Frank Kermode, who wrote this book called The Sense of an Ending, that literature needs to have an ending, and it's got to be an uplifting, happy ending. And then I'm now reading on the bottom of page 3. The more I considered it, the more I realized just how pervasive and how accurate Kermode's idea of literature actually is for English language readers. Think about what we expect from the endings of stories, not just Denise, but all of us. We expect the good guys to be saved. And Sean, if you can go down to page 4, thank you. We enjoy the good guys to be saved. If that doesn't happen, we at least expect the main character to have an epiphany. And if that doesn't happen, then at least the author ought to give us a moment of grace. All 3, saved, epiphany, moment of grace, are Christian terms. So many of our expectations of literature are based on Christianity, and not just Christianity, but the precise points at which Christianity and Judaism diverge. And then I noticed something else. The canonical works by authors in Jewish languages almost never give their readers any of those things. I was studying modern Yiddish and Hebrew literature, and I began to see that the major works in these Jewish languages almost never involved characters getting saved or having epiphanies or experiencing moments of grace. In fact, as I read my way through the foundational works in these literatures, I saw that many of the canonical stories and novels in modern Yiddish and Hebrew literature actually did not have endings at all. Thank you, Sean. We can go back to the full screen. So I found that a stunner, and I'll just say, I was reading that as we were beginning the Genesis narratives, and when you think about the patriarchal stories, every family is broken and it ends broken. So Sarah dies kind of unresolved and unreconciled with Abraham, and Abraham dies without talking to Isaac, and Isaac and Ishmael don't kind of talk anymore. And then Isaac and Rebecca and Jacob and Esau, their entire family is exploded. Nobody is connected. They're all like, they all live and they're separate and they're not talking and they die. And what you get is a cold burial scene. And of course, Joseph and his brothers, all that agony. And there's no happy ending. And of course, we all know Moses dies on the wrong side of the River Jordan, and the people are on the wrong side of the River Jordan, and then we snap back to Genesis. So it just made me, so I just wanted to pause there. What do you think about no happy endings in Jewish literature? And would love people's thoughts. Please put your comments in your willingness to speak in the chat, but I'll start with David Rosenson because I was able to see your hand.
Hi, thank you, Wes. I'm troubled by the broad generalizations that she's making here. When I saw that this subject was on your list of topics for tonight, I thought to myself, is that really true of Christian writers? And I assume we're not talking about religious writers, and I would also accept writers who are writing for a younger audience, like C.S. Lewis. But thinking about modern novelists who very consciously and obviously write from a Christian perspective, it didn't take me long to think of a few that just don't fit the paradigm. Flannery O'Connor, Graham Greene, Marilyn Robinson. I could name others, but I think what she's talking about is she's talking about literature that has a very broad appeal and maybe is pitched at a broader audience. But in the case of serious literature, I think that there are many exceptions to what she's saying. Also, she talks about Hebrew and Yiddish literature, but there's Jewish literature in English too.
Okay.
And
So,
I
fair points. I didn't read her to say that every Christian literature has saved, epiphany, and moments of grace. I heard her to say that literature that does have saved, epiphany, and moments of grace is Christian literature. Not all, right? Not all Christian literature has that, but if you have those elements which make for an uplifting ending, somebody is saved, somebody has an epiphany, somebody has a moment of grace, that's typical of Christian literature as Frank Kermode analyzed it in the sense of an ending. But the main point in all of this is that Jewish literature, Hebrew literature, Yiddish literature, and I'm certainly familiar deeply with Genesis and certainly familiar deeply with Deuteronomy. She's dead right in that case. Our literature has no happy endings.
right. If she's talking about
all the patriarchal characters, die unresolved, and then so I think that's her point. And given how much our people have suffered, perhaps that makes sense. But so,
well, if you're talking about the Bible, then of course. But I'm saying if that's not, if you're going to treat the Bible as literature, then it's also a reflection of our history, which had its terrible moments. But
right,
if you're trying to enter the psyche of the people who are writing the books, of the authors,
right.
she's overstating her case in a way that doesn't do justice to either side.
Okay.
I just want to put in that what I read it as is that she's talking about narrative theory
Right.
as taught in literature classes and writing classes,
Right.
and narrative structure, the way that it is instructed to students, because that's what my degree is in, and that is definitely what we were taught, that there's a specific narrative arc that stories follow. And the ending doesn't have to be happy, but there does have to be character growth. There does have to be a point at which you reach a climax and then things fall, that there's
Right.
a complete circle or a structure that you're supposed to be putting in there, but it really does only apply to Western literature.
Right.
And so if you're looking at Yiddish literature or Hebrew literature, you're not going to find that same exact structure.
Right.
And I
Thank
think
you,
that
Julie.
that's probably what she's
Thank
talking
you.
about.
One other thing that intersects with this, and then we'll move on to the next point, but I found her discussion of the world's second favorite Jew, Anne Frank, very connecting to this topic, because she points out that when Elie Wiesel wrote his piece as kind of an angry critique of Christians who killed Jews and who didn't stop that didn't get much press. But when he renamed it and made it a theological discussion, angry at God, where is God? That did. And then the contrast in that chapter between Anne Frank, who doesn't actually talk about what happened in the camps, and the testimony from somebody in Auschwitz who did. I mean, that's not uplifting. That is deeply not uplifting, and that it deeply comes from the camps, and it's unreconstructed, and it's no happy ending, and it's the opposite of uplifting, and it's quintessentially Jewish literature in response. I found that whole piece that Anne Frank, and she quotes the piece, and this is the one that everybody knows about, which is I believe that everybody is good. And then this where she writes, the line most often quoted from Frank's diary are her famous words, "I still believe in spite of everything that people are truly good at heart." That's nice and uplifting. And then she writes, it's far more gratifying to believe that an innocent dead girl has offered us grace than to recognize the obvious. Frank wrote about people being truly good at heart before meeting people who weren't. 3 weeks after writing these words, she met people who weren't. And then, as you know, if you read the book, she talks about the work of Zalman Gradowski, who was in Auschwitz, and Gradowski's work is not uplifting and is largely ignored by the world. Her uplifting words about, I believe people are good at heart, makes her the world's second most popular Jew. I think she's onto something there. I want to move to the chapter on Varian Fry. One of the pieces, I found that chapter really interesting, and I did. How many of you did not know this story at all? Did not even know who Varian Fry was before you read this book? I'd never heard of him. Did not know this story at all. And there's so much in that we could have an entire class. We could have 3 classes just on this chapter. For example, is the notion of, there's so much here. There's the American government's complicity in the Holocaust. The US government has blood on its hands because they wanted to save quote unquote Western culture. So get Jewish artists and Jewish literati and Jewish glitterati and Jewish poets. And then when they realized that a lot of Jews were going to get saved, they pulled the plug. That's one whole theme, how our country has blood on its hands, how Franklin Delano Roosevelt has blood on his hands, how Washington, D.C. has blood on its hands. There's just no doubt about it when you read this chapter. Beyond that, there's the moral issue of what do you think of a program where only really smart Jews who are good writers and poets and singers get saved. And if you're just an ordinary Jew and you can't sing and you can't write and you're not a poet, you're dead. And what do you think about that aspect? On the other hand, if you save a life, you save a universe. So he saved 2,000 lives. All that's super interesting. But the part that I wanted to dwell on with you now, which was so interesting to me, just like I was on the edge of my chair reading this, is that the people whose lives he saved would not call him back. Then not only were they not grateful, they were ungrateful. Not only were they ungrateful, they would not give him the time of day. What time is it? They wouldn't tell him it was 8:30. He saved their lives, and they wouldn't tell him it was 8:30. And I want to just read that. So Sean, if you can go to page 6. Just a real quick little piece. I wanted to get your reaction to that. And then I want to ask you what light you think that sheds on this. So she's trying to get at, why is somebody whose life was saved by Varian Fry not giving Varian Fry the time of day? And she writes, there is also something inherently shameful in the rescuer-rescued relationship. The humiliation of being reduced to depending on another person for survival. And the shame expresses itself in resentment towards rescuers. Gratitude is what makes you hate someone. Hannah Stein, a German Jewish journalist with whom I shared my bafflement about the legacy of Varian Fry, told me. Stein argued that this type of resentment was completely natural, and he offered his own country as a prime example. Germans hate America, he went on. They have 3 reasons to be grateful to America. America saved them from themselves, rebuilt their country after the war, saved them from the Soviets, and that's exactly why Germans hate America. If we're honest, we must admit that there is a profound shame in the fact of the Holocaust from the Jewish point of view as well. And I wondered if my discomfort with rescuer stories came directly from that shame. How on earth Fry's rescued Jews and dissidents must have wondered, could we wildly successful adults have gotten ourselves into this pathetic situation where our lives suddenly depend on the religious commitments of a pig farmer or the intellectual ambitions of an oddball like Varian Fry? Then she writes, just one last line or two, the shame is only highlighted by the enormous difference in the experience for the rescuers and the rescued. For those rescued, it was the worst time of their lives, when their lives had the least significance. For the rescuers, it was the best time of their lives, when their lives mattered most. Thank you, Sean. You can go back to this full screen. So first of all, just on its own context, what did you think about the ingratitude of the rescued in this chapter about Varian Fry? Any comments on that? What was your reaction to that? Alice?
Struck that she later says in the book, in that chapter, that this was supposedly saving Western culture. And I think that it was saving very self-satisfied, famous people.
Right.
And I think that there are people who would be grateful to be saved. I don't believe that that is always true of people who are saved. I don't mean that they have to go on extolling you the rest of their life, but I think that this, when they talk about the two who, and I can't remember which couple, they were a couple where the Alma is the one who had love affairs with everybody known to man, and another.
Werfel was the couple that.
Yeah, and they didn't even get in their clothes for their meeting with him. They wore their pajamas and their robes. And I think that these are people who expect to be treated as royalty, and Hannah Arendt, for heaven's sakes, you know, and they don't think they're regular people, and they act that way, and they believe they're worth saving, and they think that people should be grateful to be their savior. You know, so this is people with poor values.
Yeah, I found the psychological insight that she offers here about shame, the psychology of being rescued. It makes me think about my worst moment when I was most vulnerable. And then the asymmetry that for the rescuer, it's just their life is chock full of significance. And for the rescued, it's chock full of vulnerability and shame. And that asymmetry makes a relationship really hard when they're on level ground. Anyone else have any comments or reactions to that kind of psychological reading? Shirley Saunders.
I recognize what Alice has said, and I agree with her, but also could there be an element of guilt as well, that they have a sense of guilt that they survived, whereas their relatives did not.
Yeah. So I want to just thank you for that, Shirley. I want to bring this to, Newton 2021, 2022. As I shared at the outset, the issue that has the most juice and intensity in mobilizing ordinary members of Temple Emmanuel is Afghan relief. We have about 2 different families, 5 or 6 individuals who are in 2 different locations. They need a ton of relief. I mean, they don't speak English. They don't get American culture. Cultural differences are so pronounced, especially with regards to women, et cetera. And also, to Shirley's point, they were saved from the Taliban, but they have plenty of family who were not saved in the Taliban. And as I read this chapter about the asymmetry, my life is full of meaning. I'm rescuing somebody. My life is full of shame and humiliation. I have to be rescued by somebody. I was thinking an alarm bell was going off in my head, and I'm wondering about the relevance of that to our work now. I just wanted to open this up for a quick moment. Anyone have any thoughts about the asymmetry of the rescuer and the rescued? If not, happy to move on, but it struck me as something that was tremendously topical. If anyone has any comments, and if not, happy to move on. Oh, Sonia Saltzman, would love your thoughts.
So right here in our own neighborhood, I volunteer at the Newton Food Pantry, and just the other day, another volunteer was expressing to me the frustration she feels that people are so ungrateful who come to the food pantry. And that was an interesting conversation that made me think about whether we should expect gratitude or not. In that case, also, the volunteers are very, very diverse. They come from different backgrounds, so you wouldn't know of the asymmetry by looking at people. but it exists. And I think that what you're saying is very true, and what she points to, that we need to be mindful of the asymmetry and the shame that might be there, and compassionate when there isn't gratitude that is offered us.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you so much. Okay, we're now to the last part of this book, just in our short, quick tour of it, which is, if you buy what she is saying, and I certainly do, and it sounds like others on this call do, then the question is, what follows from that? And I wanted to just kind of contextualize her last few pages, which is really her response, her prescription. Chapter 11 is beyond devastating, because it turns out, I mean, we expect Adolf Hitler to hate Jews. That's kind of who he is. We expect, Stalin and the Soviets who murdered Jewish poets to hate Jews. That's kind of how they roll. That's what they do. They hate Jews, right? We expect the pogroms and the massacres. That's what they do. But in chapter 11, she tells us that William Shakespeare writes a play dripping with Jew hatred. And it's a problem at two levels. One is Shakespeare writes a play, William Shakespeare, the foundation of the Western canon, not Adolf Hitler, not Joseph Stalin. William Shakespeare writes a play dripping with Jew hatred. And how many of you knew about the backstory of 16th century England and that poor Dr. Lopez, who was castrated and mutilated and who's burnt, and vile mobs saying death to the Jew, death to the Jew, death to the Jew, all of course for no good reason. And that inspired Shakespeare to write this play where the Merchant of Venice is, humiliated and hounded, and his demise is cheered by the non-Jews, and his daughter converts to Christianity. And she, of course, if you read the chapter, that she tells that through the mind of the eyes of her 10-year-old out of the mouth of babes. And he says, this is just disgusting. But then also we're gaslit, because if you're a cool Jew, you're not supposed to say it's anti-Semitic, right? You're gaslit because it's not anti-Semitism. Shakespeare's nuanced, Shakespeare's this, it's that, it's layered, it's complex. He's not, no, but it's Jew hatred. So it's both level that Shakespeare did that and that we can't actually talk about it. That's chapter 11. And then chapter 12 is the death of Jews in New York, in New Jersey, the Hasids in Jersey City, and then her treatment about how mainstream publications like the Times and the Post provided, as she puts it, context in quotation marks, which basically justified the attacks on these Jews in ways they would never do when gays are attacked, when Black Americans are attacked, or when Latino Americans are attacked. But when Jewish Americans are attacked, context that explains and extenuating circumstances, like why it had to happen. And by the way, it was only the Hasids anyway. And she talks about, and that the commonality between Shakespeare and a few years ago when this happened in Jews is that cartoon caricatures of Jews lead to violence against Jews. And that's her point in chapters 11 and 12. And it happened in England, and it happened in New York and New Jersey. And then she writes that she gave up. She gave up. Her heart was just so broken to think that this could happen in 20 minutes from her house, 20 minutes from her house in her own lifetime. It happened in Shakespeare's England, but it's now happening 20 minutes in her own lifetime. And then she reads the New York Times and the Washington Post, which is how she interprets the world, and they contextualize it and explain it. She gives up. She gives up, okay? And now we come to the last few pages of her story, which is the response. Because even though she writes about how Jewish literature doesn't have a happy ending, we do have haftarahs that have to have a happy ending. She just can't leave us in that ditch. And her answer is daf yomi. So she talks about how there was this 90,000 strong celebration of learning Talmud in the MetLife Stadium, and that Jews throughout the world were celebrating studying Talmud. And this is how it ends. And I want to ask you if you think this is enough of a response. So Sean, if you could please put pages 7 and 8 on the screen share. I want to quote the end of her book. This is after she's given up. She just can't take it anymore. Okay. The comforting thing about Talmud study, and Daf Yomi in particular, that 7.5 years you study a page, which is actually 2 pages because it's front and back. In 7.5 years, you finish the Talmud. The comforting thing about Talmud study and Daf Yomi in particular is that you are never alone with it. Online, instead of people yelling at one another about why they were right, Daf Yomi learners gather to ask one another what this sentence means, whether their interpretation works, what the deeper meaning is. I am stunned by these strangers, by their sincerity and candor, qualities one rarely encounters today, online or off. To my amazement, many are non-Jews in the process of converting to Judaism, voluntarily joining this journey even in the darkness. To my greater amazement, one of my fellow Daf Yomi learners is my mother, the world's least pedantic person who signed on and has shown no signs of quitting. A grandmother of 14, she also now recites the Shema because, as she says, I'm up at all the watches. A mere mother of 4, I'm up for many of them too. When we finish, we will be 7 years older in our respective generations, and also, God willing, 7 years wiser. Even if we forget what we have learned, even if we are broken, even if our forgotten wisdom rattles around inside our minds like shards of broken tablets. And this is her last paragraph. I still follow today's old news. That is, that people love dead Jews. I still follow today's old news. But now I turn away from it, turn towards the old, the ancient. I am forever haunted, as all living people always are. Our minds in the dwelling places for the fears and hopes of those who came before us. I turn the page and return, carried by fellow readers living and dead, all turning the pages with me. Thank you, Sean. Back to the full picture, if you will, please. So that's her answer, Jewish learning. And my question to you is, what do you think of that? I mean, if you buy her indictment, is Jewish learning enough of a response? Does it change the world, or does it only change our world? So would love some new voices. Can I hear some new voices to offer some thoughts? Anyone want to talk about, is Jewish learning enough of a response? I'm going to just, okay. So Louise Wolf, I don't think you've shared yet, so I would love to hear your thoughts, Louise. Is Jewish learning enough of a response? And Louise, if you can unmute. Thank you.
Yes. She says elsewhere that the reason societies hate Jews is because their differentness represents the freedom to not be like everyone else. And I think one of the things about studying ancient Jewish texts is it orients you to remember that you don't have to, I mean, you can attend to what Judaism means and to Jewish thinking, and you don't have to strive to simply fit in with the society around you through thinking identical thoughts. And you can bring a different perspective, but that's one of the things that's hated, because she says Jews' differentness is a reminder that freedom exists.
Okay. Thank you, Louise. Let me marinate on that. Ned Holstein, you have a thought on whether Daf Yomi is enough?
Well, this has been a really enlightening discussion. I found the book powerful, changed many frameworks for me in powerful and lasting ways. And you took us through a variety of different thoughts that she raises and describes. The Holocaust memorials, the Jewish literature versus Christian literature, the Merchant of Venice. And people made very smart comments showing that, well, some of these things aren't always true, or there's nuance, there's complexity. But I look at it as like building a wall. A wall is made out of bricks. Each individual brick, which could be one of these thought areas that she raises, may be imperfect. But when you're done with it, and when she's done with it, she's built a wall, she's built a structure. And it's a sound structure. And it's a structure not about nuance or complexity or many prisms and so on, but it's a structure that has to do with Jew hatred. And I think we have to confront that because I think she's right. And I think that she's also offered one response, her response, the one that works for her, which is Yom Dofi. And I think that's wonderful. But I also have another side of me that says, it's a little bit like at the time of the pioneers in Israel, there were the old Jews, those were the Yom Dofi Jews. And then there were the new Jews. And the new Jews of Israel were the ones who rolled up their sleeves and got their hands dirty and their fingernails cracked and plowed the land and made a country and made a dynamic civilization. I don't see why we can't have both. I don't see why in the face of Jew hatred, we can't have Yom Dofi, the pride in our heritage, the learning, the sincerity, the brotherhood and sisterhood, and also have Jabotinsky and Begin and pioneers of Israel.
So, Ned, just to explore that, Daf Yomi, the Daf is page, Yomi is daily, the daily page. That I have a sense of what Daf Yomi daily learning would look like. What would the more activist prong look like in our world today?
I don't think I'm necessarily the right person to try and answer that. I think it has to be a group answer, but it has to be marked by courage, determination, pride, and the realization that things don't always come out for the best. And so one has to ask the question, how am I going to live my life in the face of this? And if I go down one way or another, maybe not killed, maybe it's my career, maybe it's being humiliated, maybe it's less than being killed, but how am I going to live my life? And I think the answer has to be with dignity, courage, and an attitude that if I'm going down, I'm taking one of you with me.
Thank you, Ned. A lot to think about. Marty Paley.
I've been doing Daf Yomi for quite a while. In fact, actually in Temple Emmanuel with a group with a wonderful teacher named Jesse Hefter. Anyway, the studying of Daf Yomi, I think, is enough, and I'll tell you why. Because it's not necessarily what's written on the page. What some people know is that Talmud is very pedantic. It talks about the structure of the Beit HaMikdash, and that really is not a big turn on. On the other hand, the interplay, the chevruta between the people studying is what really brings things to mind. And I think that's really the great part about studying Talmud. Also, rarely, I mean, almost never, is somebody arrogant that says, I know more than you do, you should listen to me. There's never that kind of interplay in Daf Yomi study. And even though some of the topics are kind of dry, that's not the point. The point is to be able to learn together, and things come out of it when you're studying the dimensions of the Beit HaMikdash that are instructive. So yes, I do think that's quite something. And also, just with Ned's point, is that most of the rabbis in the Talmud had other jobs. They weren't just scholars; they were artisans of most of the time. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah. So Marty, I want to just, I love that you do Daf Yomi and have been doing it for years. Who could not love the concept? But I do want to, let's pose the following thought experiment. Imagine that 4,000 Jews at Temple Emmanuel commit to Daf Yomi, and we really do it. And every day people learn a page, which again is actually 2 pages because it's front and back, and each one is a lot. And so 7.5 years, we would have learn the Talmud. I have no doubt, I'm 100% certain that each of us would be better off for that. That our community would be stronger, would be more deeply connected, that each of us would be more inspired. We would have learned more, we would have thought more, we would have been challenged more, right? So our world would be so much better. Who could argue? But the question I leave you with is, what about the world? It feels to me, I'm deeply comfortable with that, right? Because I'm deeply comfortable with closing myself in at 385 Ward Street and talking to Jews all day. That's where I've cast my lot. My question, though, is if we do that, in what way are we shaping the world? And I think that the question that I have, I'm mindful of how, Rabbi Chill, may he rest in peace, did significant interfaith work where he was not talking to the Jewish community all day. He was talking to people who were not Jews, and he was dealing with real anti-Semitism in the trenches, in conversations. And I'm wondering, that's not in her chapter 12. And I'm just raising the question whether that should be also in ours. It's an and, it's not an or, it's a yes and, whether that should also be part of it. Dina Bernstein, your hand is up.
I think you just raised the point that I wanted to make, which is she posed, for all the chapters of the book, she basically posed the problem that Jews are two-dimensional to the greater community. I mean, I think you can put a lot of those chapters under that rubric. That given the anti-Semitism, its least evil position, it's that the world doesn't know what Jews really are, and they turn them into stick figures effectively. And then I thought the Daf Yomi chapter was a disconnect. It's how we can be more comfortable with ourselves and create community, but it doesn't say how we get from being two-dimensional to being three-dimensional, which seems to be the problem. That's the Merchant of Venice. That's a Holocaust museum. It doesn't pose that. And I think, as you suggested, working in the community, having conversations about making the two-dimensional three-dimensional is where the solution is. And perhaps that is interfaith work.
Thank you, Dina. Two last comments. We'll start with Chaya Bekevi.
Thank you. I think that the part of the purpose of the Daf Yomi obviously is educational and intellectual, but as was mentioned before, it reinforces the comfort of being identified as a Jew. And I think part of the problem with what do we do now and where do we go from now is a lot of Jews are not so eager to put themselves out as Jews and to act as Jews on behalf of Jews. And it may be that their reinforced identity brings a certain level of comfort and pride so that one can do outreach, that one can communicate, and that one can criticize more comfortably. So if the New York Times has either a reportage or an editorial or an op-ed that is so glaringly unbalanced and distorting that it's not only another renegade op-ed writer that Bret Stephens that sometimes writes as a Jew and pride of doing this, or David Brooks, but people on the street and the community feel that they can call people out, and they, not like the Jewish Defense League that chose violence, but a little more forceful in terms of the verbal communication.
Thank you, Chaya. I'm going to give the last comment to Alice Bressman, and then we'll close up.
Thank you. And I kind of am a perfect lead-in for what Chaya said. You asked, what can we do? And there are people in our own congregation working at countering anti-Semitism. I put my email address in the comment box. Please write to me if you'd like to join in this.
and something that we're actively doing throughout the Massachusetts and New England. We're trying to get synagogues, churches, communities, Sharon adopted this, states, to adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. We as synagogues, we Jews know what anti-Semitism is, but it's the non-Jews who don't necessarily know it. And if we define it, then maybe they'll know it. So we're working toward that, and we're working toward other things with other synagogues, with Hadassah, with ADL. So if you're interested, please email me. And thank you, Rabbi, for calling on me.
Pleasure. So let me just end by saying, I love this book because it so vividly describes the reality of the Jews' place in world history, including in our own country. And I've read, I think, everything that's been written about this book. And I have not read one report that says anything she writes in it is untrue. There's no one has critiqued it for being false. The biggest critique of her book, and this was offered by none other than Abe Foxman, you know, who's himself a survivor and was the head of the ADL. He says, I accept what you write, your facts, I don't accept your premise. And I don't accept your conclusion. I accept your facts and I accept your conclusion. And Abe Foxman critiques her there in dialogue because he says, if you read your book, you're not hopeful. Where's the hope? And he wants hope. And so I think, and her hope at the end is Daf Yomi. I think we are constituted, despite what she says about Jewish literature in Hebrew and Yiddish. We as humans want hope. And by the way, the name of the national anthem of the state of Israel is Hatikva. So we need hope. So where's the hope going to come from? And I think it's got to be multiple sources. I think Jewish learning, you can never go wrong with Jewish learning. I think advocacy that Chaya and Alice are talking about, you can never go wrong with advocacy. But I also think there's a lot, one of the big dangers is that we Jews talk to Jews and we don't talk to non-Jews. We're not enough in the outside world. I want to say that bridge building is really hard to do. When I read Caste last year by Isabel Wilkerson, it fundamentally changed how I saw our country and systemic racism in our country. And we worked in partnership with the Western Avenue Baptist Church and Jeremy Battle, and we had 4 sessions, and it was really hard. Good and necessary, but really hard. Real bridge building work is really hard. And I know in all candor that while it's really important, we haven't done it since it was over. And I've gotten no emails from Western Avenue saying, hey, can't we do part 2? And I've gotten no emails from Temple Emmanuel saying, why can't we do part 2? And the reason is, while it was really important and very valid, it's really hard. Like studying Talmud with Jews is much easier. Like really having conversations with non-Jews who don't get us is really hard. And I think that that is an ongoing piece of the work that needs to be done. So Jewish learning, yes. Advocacy, yes. But bridge building. So here's your homework. Do something. Do Daf Yomi. Do advocacy. Build bridges. But do something, because what she writes in this book is sadly not only horrific, it's also true. And it is also on us to do something. And I'll tell you one last thing you can always do. You can always go to Israel. And we're doing Hartman again in Israel. Of course, who knows, everything is is etched in sand given COVID. But if COVID makes it not impossible, we're going to be in Jerusalem again. And Jerusalem is just, and Israel is still the best and strongest response to the problem she writes about in this book. So join us in Israel. We're going to be there. It's going to be a strong delegation. And we're going to be talking, the subject is, by the way, I'll give you the subject of Israel. If you want real hope, you might as well go to a place whose national anthem is called The Hope. And it is this year Aspirational Zionism, Revitalizing a Moral Conversation about Israel. So if you're thinking, what can I do to create more hope in the face of the real world? Join us at Hartman. Finally, last comment is our T.E. Reid's next book. We're going to change it up. Elizabeth Strout wrote a new book called Oh, William. It's about the complexities of marriage. And we're going to be reading Elizabeth Strout, Oh, William, fabulous book about marriage, January 25th. And we'll look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you so much, and a Shabbat Shalom.